All right, guys, it's that time of the week. It's Mondays with Mazur, Tuesdays with Tony. Tony, where are you?
I'm down in Hilton Head right now.
Oh,
I've got
that's right.
I've got like a swamp behind me and about 2 blocks from the beach. But I had to do this because I'm on vacation, and apparently you had some news that you broke the other day.
Borning. Yeah,
oh boy.
Yeah, I don't know. I kind of put it up. I did a live the other day. I talked about it, but yeah, I guess I'm no longer with MLC anymore.
Okay, so what? So I want to know. So I didn't get a chance to see the Instagram live. What I just see the thing, and I see, I quit MLC because of you assholes, or whatever the case was, and Jim Stansel you were blaming, and everybody else. Like, what's going on? I'm getting ready for vacation. I can't wait for Monday and to do this on vacation, and then I find this out. I'm like, oh, we've got some news here.
Well, it's been boiling. It's a number of things. It's not one situation. It's just some of the fans just get under my skin, bothering me. The inconsistency of the podcast, and me putting all this work in, and Kevin not really wanting to do it anymore. So I'm like, what am I doing? And then someone reminded me that Kevin was paying Brian all this money, and it pissed me off. I'm like, I've done more than Brian McCarthy has ever done for the show, and I'm putting all this energy into it. I go, I should be just focusing on my own thing. So I said, I'm done. And Kevin blew off the football show because he didn't feel like doing it. So I'm like, what am I doing? What am I doing? What am I doing? So I said, I'm done. Go find somebody else. I'm tired of being people's co-host. And it reminded me a couple of things Kev did where he wanted me to move a guest around, or he denied a guest. And it reminded me of Alan Cox. And I'm like, all right, I'm done being people's co-host. I'm done being Mike Polk's co-host, Alan Cox's co-host, I'm done. I don't need it.
Because that was what was interesting about MLC, is that it's not a show. It's a show you can be a co-host, but you're really just a character on this journey through Kevin's mental health. So it's like, you have Neil, you have Lenny. I get him confused, of course. You get Lenny to start, you get Jimmy, you have Brian, and then there's like kind of a weird period where there's really nobody, and you kind of came out of nowhere during the pandemic stuff. And then, but it's a journey of what is going on with Kevin in his mind. And it's a tough show. And I say this as somebody who, you had me on as a guest a couple of times on MLC. It's a tough show to do.
It's hard
because you've been on Artie and Anthony, and trying to get a line in there is impossible. And with someone like Kevin, when you're doing it on Zoom, is just, it really does seem impossible to go like, hey, I've got a funny line, but you can't just jam it in there. And talking over people and everything. It's a tough show to do.
Well, that was my thing with Brian all the time. Like, he was always constantly interrupting, and it drove me nuts. And I was like, I never wanted to be that guy, because I did a show with Erica. She used to interrupt constantly, and it fucks up the flow. It fucks up everything. So you got to pick your spots, and you got to be quick. You got to be really quick. So yeah, you're right. It's definitely a difficult show to do. And honestly, the last couple episodes I've been on, I wasn't having fun. I was just like, I'm just sitting there. And for some reason, like, Kevin wants to do like an hour and a half, 2 hours. And I was like, I tap out after an hour. I'm like, I'm out.
Yeah, certain shows. I mean, that's the thing with Rogan can do 4 hours, but it also depends on the guest, because even Joe knows that you're not going to have like, trying to think of just like any random guest for 4 hours. But if you can have Kumia, you can have him on for 3 hours and you'll be fine. Or Michael Malice, or some of these other people, Jordan Peterson, that can talk. I mean, if you're booking like, a couple of the guys that Kevin has on, like a Tom Cassidy or an Ian Fidance, you're not going to do 2.5 hours with them. Do 50 minutes, do 50 and tap out. That's fine.
Yeah, we had some guests on. I forgot his name a couple weeks ago. He's from LA. Oh, by the way, I got recognized from Artie and Anthony, that clip yesterday in Tampa.
Oh, really?
I was downtown Tampa. I'm riding my bike, and this guy's in a food truck screaming my name, and I go, "What?" I roll my bike over because no one knows who I am down here. He's like, "Dude, I loved you on Artie and Anthony, man. That clip is amazing. I love the Kumia show, dude." It was kind of cool. But anyways,
Great.
yeah. But what was I saying? I lost my train of thought.
Well, you were talking about the length of the podcast and everything.
Yeah,
and some of the guests. You had a guest on from LA.
Yeah, I forgot his name. He was a nice enough guy, but I was just I was not into it. I wasn't interested. I didn't think he was funny, and I just kept looking at the clock. It kept going. So I know people are out there. They're busting their ass. They got harder jobs. They're blue collar, but the difference between me and you is you're getting compensated. I'm not.
Yeah.
So I gotta financially. It's got to make sense to me for putting time and energy into something when you don't get anything out of it. It's just, to me, I love MOC. I love Kevin. He's hilarious, without a doubt. He's one of the funniest human beings of all time. But I gotta, if I'm doing 3 shows with him a week, there's got to be some sort of compensation. And I appreciate all the Patreons, the ones that I do have. Thank you. But it's got to make sense. I'd rather work on sit down Zumach and put energy into that, because that's where my money's coming from.
And you were kind of, like you said, you've been a co-host before. You've co-hosted several radio shows, not just Alan Cox. And at first you kind of felt like, okay, I could do this with Kevin because I'm the unofficial co-host. It's no problem. Kevin is kind of, it's his show, and you knew your place. Brian didn't know his place. Brian took over the show in a lot of ways and thought he was the star. But again, your place. And you're like, hey, I'm a guy who's here to try to make Kevin funnier. You're trying to make Kevin better. If you need him to be on point, or you just let him loose. It depends on his mood that day, because it does certainly change a lot. And you knew your place for a while. It's just, the problem is that place starts getting grating. And when you didn't, I guess, not necessarily your fault, but not putting your foot down at the beginning, where you're like, okay, I'll be a frequent guest. And then it'd be like, I'll be kind of like the co-host. And when that happens, you realize how much you can get taken advantage of in any situation. It's kind of like doing gigs for free. We do this in radio. And that's when I started in radio. I'm not kidding, for the first almost 3 years of radio, I never got paid. Yeah. I just did like volunteer work. I was an intern. And you realize over time that I'm an intern, and I am they're taking advantage of me. I mean, my first year of interning in radio is when the Cavs were going to the finals back in 2007. And looking at the schedules for the part-time employees versus the interns, and it was, Casey, I need you to work 3 to 7, and Holly, you from like 1 to 5. Tony, I need you to get there at 12:30, pick up the equipment, stay through the game, and then after post-game, take it down. And realize I did a 14, 15-hour day with Michael Regai. I did 14, 15 hours. Not only did I not get paid, the Clevelander didn't even comp my food. So I was in the hole even more so. But I wanted to do it to achieve that level. But over time, you go, guys, I can't keep doing this. I can't keep pulling 15, 16-hour days, not getting paid for them, and sometimes not even getting appreciated for it. And that's the worst part.
Let me ask you something. Does it bother you that you had to work for Glenn Moore?
I never got paid by Glenn Moore either.
So Glenn Moore took advantage of you.
There were a lot of people who took advantage of me. And honestly, doing that in comedy too, because you've probably done countless shows where you didn't get paid for them. And that's just open mics, like a charity show, a show where it's hey, we're just getting this comedy club off the ground, and then it closes like 2 months later and you never got paid. Like I did that once. There was a comedy club in the great city of Alliance, Ohio, where several years ago I did a show, and I'm not kidding. I've never actually admitted this to you. I did steal one of your jokes just because I was bombing.
Oh, cool. No, that's fine.
But it was, the reason I did it was there was a mall in Alliance that was right next to a Ponderosa. And I used your Arthur Treacher's line about how I think this is the only Ponderosa left. And they didn't tell this particular Ponderosa. I was bombing because I go on stage, or I'm about to go on stage 5 minutes before. And the guy who was running it said, no cursing, Content has to be about PG to PG-13. There's no alcohol. And so I'm like, so I have to alter about 90% of my act.
Sounds like a terrible gig.
On the fly. It was a bad gig. It was and I'm like, I have to throw anything I can out there. I was doing street jokes, like I was Jackie Martling. And the worst part is afterward, I didn't get paid.
No, Daniel Tosh told me a story once that he would do these colleges, and they were such hell gigs that he ended up doing Jim Gaffigan's act just to get through it.
I mean, I had to do 15 to 20 minutes. And at that point, I'm not that far along into comedy. I think it was maybe 2 or 3 years into doing it. And I'm just trying to do everything I can. So then after I get off stage, I have a couple of friends who were in the area, and I bomb in front of them, and I have to go up to them and say, I promise I'm not this bad. They're like, well, we know, we've seen your act. It's dirty. But like when you get done and you do those gigs, especially like doing charity work is one thing, but then when you're doing like all charity work, like Mike Conley, like our friend Mike Conley, you go, look, I'm doing my comedy for free, and I feel like my services are not getting appreciated. So sometimes you just go, guys, you gotta make it worth my while. You gotta at least buy me dinner or something.
Or any gig that Ramon Rivas or Bill Squire, whatever room they stole and they undercut the price and they took the money for themselves. That's another charity gig.
I did a lot of those because so there's a difference in when you're doing a lot of local rooms, like if you're a local comic, and I'm not a guy I'm not on marquees or anything. So I was doing a lot of local gigs. So there's a difference between your typical open mic where it's just comics in the audience and actual gigs, like at Brothers Lounge or a couple other places. Didn't get paid for those, but I'm trying to do so because I want to experience different audiences. And, before we were using the term woke, I would go in front of those audiences to see how my act would work. And sometimes it wouldn't work out too well. And then I would get done off stage and realize that they're charging $10 at the door, but I'm not getting a cut of the $10 that they're charging. We've got a full room, and I look around and there's a couple of the guys who are running the thing buying drinks. I'm like, yeah, that's the audience's money that you're buying those drinks with. And you're not paying me? What the fuck's going on?
No, I don't do any open mics anymore. Every now and then, when I was recording that album, Florida's Most Wanted, which you can stream it on Pandora, Spotify, wherever, or buy it on iTunes. I was jumping on mics to work on bits. So that's the only time I ever do it is if I'm working on bits, because I'm at the point, and I was talking to Florentine about this. I don't need to get on stage. I don't need, like, I've had whatever that thing is that was at 10,000 hours. I've achieved it. I've been on stage. I don't have stage fright. I don't have any of that. So if I'm on stage, I want to use it. I'm either making money or working on something. That's the only reason. I don't need to be on stage. I just don't need to be.
Well, and plus the thing is, back in the day was listening to yourself on a microphone and getting comfortable with the microphone in your hand and listening to your voice and how you can respond. Well, you've done that, 3-4 times a week now. You're doing podcasting your own. You did Kevin's podcast. You were a guest on other podcasts and everything. So you know what your voice sounds like. That's the one big thing back in the day before podcasts was I need to get on stage because I need a microphone in my face. And why I wanted to start doing comedy too, because it was, I needed to have that opportunity to let loose. Well, now I do. I have my podcast, which is called Check Your Brain, heard weekly for free on wherever you get your podcasts, and my Patreon at $5 a month at patreon.com/Tony Mazur. But doing radio, doing podcasting was it was an opportunity to really let loose of things that I can't really do on stage. So then now that I go on stage, I don't need to get political because I have a podcast to do it. I could just tell dick jokes all I want on stage. But again, I also don't need to be on stage all the time. I mean, I'm not an Aaron Berg or a Jim Norton where I got to be on stage 3-4 sets a night, or Steve Byrne or any of these other guys. I could do some sets, and I could go weeks without doing sets.
Yeah. By the way, I got to be honest with you, full disclosure. One of my Patreon, he was very, very good to me on Patreon for a long time. My man Donovan, he's no longer on Patreon because he hates Mondays with Mazur.
Uh-oh. Sorry. Is it Donovan, the singer from the 70s and 80s?
No, I'm not going to blow up his last night because he's been very generous to me. But I got in this back and forth with him, so he deleted his Patreon pledge to my thing because he hates the show. And I go, listen, here's one thing that's not going to happen. By the way, I ran a survey. Everyone loves it. I'm not going to let people dictate what I do and who I do it with. I like doing this show with Tony, period. This is what it is. Sorry, but I'm not going to get bullied around by the Patreon or listeners. Like, they're trying to bully me right now with Kevin, and I'm not going to let it happen. I don't give a fuck. You guys don't, it's cool that you're on board. I appreciate it, but you're not going to I'm not going to bow to you because you don't like Tony or whoever, I'm just not going to do it because there's plenty of people that do.
The whole concept of this podcast thing that we're doing is these are our phone calls. And you've done podcasts like this before, your good friend Sam Tripoli, but you would do these things where it's, hey, we're just catching up, and you and I we would talk on Mondays anyways. Would usually be something pissed us off over the weekend, or something with Kevin, something with whatever, and it would be like, hey, let's have it. And so we said, well, why don't we just turn these into we would do this after almost every phone call, say, boy, this would be a great podcast. That's why we're doing it.
And it's bonus content for both our Patreons. So it's not like it's just bonus content. So shut the fuck up.
And also,
don't listen to it if you don't like it. Don't listen to it.
You don't have to. It's like I'm a Compound Media subscriber, but I don't watch Morning. I like Bill. I like Joanne. I'm not the biggest fan of their show. I don't have to watch. It doesn't mean I'm going to cancel because there are shows on their network I don't like. I just won't listen.
Do you watch In the Wet Spot? The Wet Spot?
Well, of course. I mean, I watch the porn stars and yeah. Which, did you see Chrissy Mayer wasn't even on her own show last week because she was doing another show?
I mean,
she was doing her live podcast while her other live show was going on. She had a guest host for her show.
I mean, you know how many people she hits up to do their show? Like she has to be on everybody's podcast. She just relentlessly goes and asks everybody to be on their podcast. It's just like, when's enough? Like, nobody's asking for you. Nobody's going, dude, we need Chrissy Mayer. Just stop.
She was on Megyn Kelly's podcast because I think Megyn Kelly's been doing a lot of the, having comedians on. I don't know if she might have had Shane Gillis and a couple other people that she had on, where I think Megyn Kelly is doing a lot of First Amendment stuff and what you can and cannot say. And I don't know, I'm assuming Frank probably just put her name out there saying, hey, my girlfriend's available. Do some shows. Nobody
in the world has used Anthony Cumia's name more than Chrissy Mayer. She's exhausted Anthony Cumia's name to get on podcasts, to get guests. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Like how I know Cumia doesn't give a fuck, but if he knew how much Chrissy used his name to get places, she's not passed at any of the comedy clubs in New York. She doesn't get spots at the Stand. She doesn't get spots at the Cellar. I'm passed at more comedy clubs in New York than Chrissy Mayer is. So that's a problem. That's a big problem.
Is Gino passed at more clubs than her?
I think so.
What just LOL?
But it's true. It's a fact. No one's knocking down her door, man. It's just like, she works hard, but it's just annoying. It's just, I don't know. I just don't like when mediocre people are, they're always saying, oh, you got to have work ethic. I'm like, yeah, but you got to have some talent too. You got to back it up with some talent. Where's the talent?
I've only seen Chrissy's act one time, but it was also a home game. It was the White Plains Comedy Club, which Frank runs. So, and it was a Comedians of the Compound game or a show. And it was, you're going to get the audience who knows who she is. And I knew who she is because she was on In Hot Water a few times doing characters. She didn't have her own show yet. And I don't even think Cumia had her on as a guest yet. But no, it's look, I admire the hard work for people, especially, I mean, look, I'm not the most talented guy in the world either. My podcast is what it is. My comedy is what it is. I work at a radio station that I'm not on the air as much as I used to be, mainly because of me spouting off about COVID stuff. And then others, it's just the way the radio works. But it's my day job, and it puts a roof over my head and a beer in my hand. So, and it helps me afford a vacation like this. But, we have our strengths and our weaknesses, and you got to kind of lean into what those strengths and try to figure out what you can do to help your weaknesses. And that's what I'm trying to figure out with my podcast. And that's why I actually wanted to ask you about that is, so with you not being on MLC anymore, MLC gave you some exposure. Here's the problem though, is one thing about that I had with the issue, I guess, with Kevin going full Patreon is that now you're turning it into that echo chamber where if you're not a guest on other networks, if if Louis J. Gomez doesn't have Kevin on Legion of Skanks or something, going full paywall is now you're just talking to your audience, which is great. It's fine. And if you have that audience that can do that and pays your bills, that's great. But I guess maybe I'm old school radio guy in a lot of ways where I want to talk to as many people as possible, potential listeners, and then say, hey guys, by the way, I also have a Patreon. If you really enjoy my work, help me out financially. Here's a link, here's the Patreon, and here's this. And some people will go. Like, you got to figure that out of a 100% share of an audience, you'll probably get 5% or under. If you're putting out free content, that you'll have 5% or under who are going to come over for more exclusive content. And I get that. So it's just a numbers game at that point. That's why I don't want to be at my point in my career. I'm not going full Patreon because I don't have the audience yet. I want to continue building that audience. So I'm going to keep doing free content and putting stuff out there for people. So you're at that point where you've got a good number of Patreon subscribers. Is this something like, do you have another plan, or are you just going to figure out like as this goes and try to just reshape and refocus the Sit Down Zoom podcast?
No, I'm gonna put all my energy into it, but I'm like you. I think that was another thing I had. Again, it's not Kevin's podcast was not my podcast, and I didn't agree, and I never voiced it because it's not my podcast. I think we should be free. I think we should be everywhere, not just on you. And then it got to the point where he was like, he couldn't say swear words anymore behind the paywall, and because he's trying to monetize his YouTube, which doesn't make any sense because he's not running ads right now, so it doesn't matter. So I didn't like that. I was like, one of the reasons I love this podcast so much, you say whatever the fuck you want. And when he started editing himself and cutting things out, I was like, this is fucking lame.
Okay, so, I wanted to ask you that because I didn't know how much common knowledge that if people were picking up on that. Because I didn't want to say it right away. I wanted you to at least say it because I have noticed that when listening is that there were things that were cut out that even on the free podcasts that they were putting out a couple of years ago, those words, certain gay slurs, and not even just gay slurs, just whatever, we're starting getting snipped out. Like I remember hearing Alex Engelbert on the show and the amount of times that was cut. And I'm like, this is a Patreon podcast.
Yeah.
This is you don't have to do this unless you have a plan to put something on YouTube. And then it gets to that point where you want to put out free content, but then is your free content going to be better or worse than your Patreon content? But
Kevin doesn't understand, like his YouTube channel is not monetized yet. So it doesn't matter. So when I do this or whatever, they go through and they look for certain words, certain things you say, and you're like, they'll basically say, okay, we can monetize very little of it because of your language. So it doesn't matter. But what I'm saying is he's not running ads, so it doesn't matter what we say on his podcast. And I also think I disagree with just putting out on YouTube because I never watch podcasts. I listen to them audio only. And there's a lot of people like me. And Kevin has a shitload of subscribers on like iTunes and everywhere else, but he doesn't see the numbers. So he likes to look at the numbers. So it's just a disagreement. It's his podcast, like I said. So, but I'm like, we're never going to grow. It's not going to grow. It's just going to be what it is. And I also don't like how he just panders to the Ski Mask crew. It's just like, who gives a fuck about them? Who gives a fuck about Jim Stansel and those dudes? I seriously don't give a fuck about those guys. Why do you pander to those fucking nobodies?
Well, Mead's dating that Amanda Gale, and hey, big applause for that. That's a catch. That's a catch right there.
She's a comic?
She's a female comic, yeah.
Let me pull her up.
And I'm like, wow, that's quite a catch. I'll say this though.
I like him. Out of all those guys, I like him.
So Gavin McInnes has I think it's censored.tv, and he does a bunch of shows a week, but then he puts out a free podcast on iTunes. And how it hasn't been taken down just because of who he is, the Proud Boys and everything. but he puts out about a half-hour show a week, and they have ads that are on there, and they don't get into anything. And I'm thinking to myself, I love Gavin, but you got to get more people into, you got to talk stories. You got to do a show that's representative of what you want people to listen to more. So if you're somebody like Kevin, where you say, I want to do this many podcasts a week. Like if I were running MLC, if I were Kevin, what I would have done, and he's going to hate me if I say this, that's okay, is putting out a free podcast per week and then doing like 2 more. And then your free podcast per week would go like a couple of days early. So if you're a subscriber, you already got that show. But if you're not subscribing, then that show comes out like 2 days later. And so you get an opportunity for people, no, I want to hear this podcast as soon as it comes out. So I'm going to subscribe. Then I do other content, but you also have to have your content be representative, the free stuff, representative of what you do on your show, and vice versa, because you want to bring people over and give them a taste. But I understand the mindset of, if I put too much free stuff out there, people are just going to want to hear the free stuff. And the way I see it is, okay, then, you can't beg them. You can't put a gun to their head or their pregnant stomach like George Floyd did.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting model. And I don't know if anybody's perfected it, because that's been my critique with Compound Media, is I love the network and I love a lot of the shows on there, but it's very insular, and you're going to get your same callers, your same viewers, and the same people showing up to the live gigs, because you're not putting out enough to grab. I mean, think about it. The Opie and Anthony show ended 7 years ago. If you're a 20-year-old, that meant you were 13 and probably not listening to radio at that time. So you have no point of reference of the Opie and Anthony show. You largely have no point of reference to the great Howard Stern show and all these other programs. So you need to keep almost reinventing yourself in some way and attracting a new audience. I mean, hell, think about this. You haven't been on the Alan Cox show in almost 9 years now. I mean, there are 20-year-olds who are listening to that who were 10 when you were on. They don't remember you on the show. So it's like that's why focusing on when you have listeners that say, oh, Alan Cox, it's like a lot of people don't have no idea what the fuck you're talking about anymore.
Yeah, no, I believe in trying to get all eyes and all ears on whatever you're doing, because there's so many fucking outlets now. So however you can grab them. So I don't know. Here's the thing with Kevin's a fucking genius. He's hilarious, but I'm over it. I don't know. I don't know what else to say. I know people liked it. I liked it sometimes, and it just, things evolve, people move on. And, I gotta use my time wisely. I can't be putting all my time in Kevin's podcast when he doesn't even put time into his podcast. So why would I do it?
So let me ask, is the relationship with Kevin severed now?
I don't think so. I haven't talked to him.
Is this going to be a Brian, Lenny, Jimmy situation? Well, Jimmy actually came back for a couple of guest appearances, but is this done, or is this something that maybe in a couple of months that maybe he'll have you on as a guest? You're like, yeah, absolutely, I'll come back on as a guest.
Well, I was never really a co-host. I told him from the get-go, I don't want to be a co-host, because you never talk to your co-host ever again. So hopefully I'll keep that in account. But on the flip side of that, like, I'm not like Brian or Lenny, where they refuse to talk to Kevin. Like, I'm not that guy, and I'm not going to dodge questions or anything. I'll still talk about it. It is what it is. I don't. Like when I was done with Alan Cox, I was done with that motherfucker. I hated his guts. Kevin, I don't hate. I just knew enough's enough. So I was like, I don't need to do this. I don't need to be putting my time and energy into the show anymore. Like, I got to figure out how to build my podcast, and I see growth in my podcast numbers too and I don't just look at YouTube. I look at the other things too, like the analytics on Libsyn. So I'm just going to continue to focus on that. Whatever it is, it's mine. And that's how I get paid.
Is it, when you're focusing the show, is it to do more solo content? Like, here's what's on my mind, or is it guest related? Is it getting like the bigger guests, or is it getting like good frequent guests, or like, I guess I'm kind of like doing the, how do you make the sausage type of conversation, but like, what is when you say you want to focus, or are you still trying to figure that out? Is this too fresh? The wound is a little fresh from MLC that you're like, all right, I'm going to work through this week and see where this goes. And if I'm going to see an uptick in numbers, maybe I'll just keep leaning into that.
Well, no, I don't want it to be as guest driven. I don't want to rely on. I heard a podcast with Tom Segura recently. He was on someone's podcast talking about how he purposely did not want his podcast that he does with his wife be guest driven. So I'm doing it with my guy who's producing it, Tyler. He's like kind of like the active co-host, where we're going more topics where, you know, if I don't get a guest, that's all right. Me and Tyler just go over like what's going on in the news and shit like that. And I think that's just the best way to do it for me. And I see the numbers growing from that. So, you know, like I had someone just canceled on me recently, and I was at school. We'll just go over, like, I'll just put a bunch of topics together and we'll just kind of go through it.
Yeah, it's that's the one thing, is that people fall into that trap of getting a guest. And I always thought that with MLC is that sometimes MLC didn't need a guest. There's no, like, is Barry Ribs going to do something more for your show that you can't already do? Right. And that's, and honestly, this is, this is kind of like a breaking the radio producer fourth wall right now, is if I'm going on the air, so working in sports radio, for example, it's always, hey, we got to get a guest on this. Hey, there's breaking news. Hey, you know, for example, the Indians changed their name to the Guardians. Well, Chad, you're in Tampa. Let's get a Cleveland guy on. Hey, let's get a beat reporter. Let's get a radio guy. Let's get one of the guys who, you know, reports for them on television. And you say, oh, that we have to do that as a radio. And so you start thinking about it and go, okay, I tried to book Tom Hamilton, the voice of the Indians. Well, I can't get him. What about the general manager of the Indians to talk about the team? Now he's unavailable. He's not doing any media. And then you start going down the list of people to talk to, where to the point where you're talking to a blogger in Cleveland who wrote a blog on the name change. And you say, well, wait a second here.
Scott Sargent,
yeah. Or Craig Lynn. I love Craig. I'm just kidding.
Waiting for next year.
But using
due
that
for
as
a name
example,
change, by the way.
That's true. Yeah. Well, I mean, unless they're waiting for the Browns next year, we'll see.
Yeah.
But when you start getting to that point where you already are like, I'm finding bloggers and I'm finding people that have like a small podcast that no one listens to on to talk about the name change, that why can't I just talk about the name change? And that's the problem in radio, and what I'm seeing in podcasting is the heavy reliance on a guest, where the host is way more famous than the guests that they have on. So it's like, well, why don't we just talk about it? Why don't we'll open up the phones. We'll say, what do you think of the Guardians? Do you think that's a good name? Do you think it's stupid? Is the Indians' name, was it racist or is that historic? Give us a call, 216-578-1111. So you would do that. That's a better topic, and that's better to talk to with listener interaction and engagement than getting some guy with bad audio quality on his Zoom or on his phone to talk about the name change or any story. And I think a lot of podcasts fall into that trap where somebody like, and that's why I think somebody like Kevin doesn't need a guest. When Cumia, for example, on his show, sometimes his 5 o'clock guest didn't call in. They forgot, they've had problems. Well, Cumia can do the next hour by himself standing on his head. Sometimes that's how it works. And you can do that. You got to be flexible. And I think too many people rely on, oh shit, well, I don't know if we could do a show today because Barry Ribs isn't able to do the show. Who gives a fuck about Barry Ribs or some of the other people? I mean, no, by the way, I'm just using Barry as an example, Atticus.
Yeah, I don't care. I'm done pandering to all these fucks. I'm done.
I might want Barry on my show, my podcast too.
So yeah, well, that's the thing. Like, I'd look at the Lipson numbers and I'd see if I had Tim Dillon on, it gets 10,000 downloads, and then I have the bad guy from Cobra, and it only gets 1,000 downloads. So it's just like, I don't need that. Like, yeah. I'd rather you just come to see me, not rely on whoever's on.
Like, what if Ray DeVito? You did a podcast with him and there were like really good numbers. Are you going to do a show with him? Like, have him as a frequent guest?
Yeah, I'm not going to do a podcast with Ray DeVito.
What about Trader Joe's Jeff Blanchard, who just got married the other day?
Oh, he did.
Yeah. I think they got married in aisle 7.
He got married. Let me look that up.
Yeah, he did. Well, I think he's had a girlfriend for a long time.
He was dated that Donna for a long. He was married to her for a long time.
Donna Dixon?
Is that her name?
No, that's Dan Aykroyd's wife.
Oh, okay. Trader Joe's Jeff Blanchard. Let's check this out.
Congratulations.
He didn't change his Facebook profile, so it's no, yes, he did. Who is this chick? All right, good for him.
Good for him.
Good for Trader Joe's Jeff Blanchard. He's got insurance. He's got health insurance.
Yeah, exactly. They had the reception there. Instead of a buffet, you get like a credit card or something. You get a $50 limit at the Trader Joe's to buy your dinner.
Jesus.
$50 a plate.
Actually, somebody on the Patreon did ask, what do you think of the name change since you're the big Indians guy over there?
If I cared about the baseball team, then maybe I would have more of an opinion. I think everything's stupid. I think the fact that the reason they changed to Washington changed the football team was they knew damn well that they're not going to get the blowback by changing the Redskins name because it was the COVID year and you couldn't go to the game anyways. So by the time the fans are readmitted into the stadium, everybody already knows about the team, and it's kind of like, oh, okay, they're the Washington football team now. Yeah, I think the Guardians. Here's my take: is first of all, I don't give a fuck what they changed them to. They could have been the Cleveland George Floyds or whatever. It didn't matter to me. The one thing is though that I'm wondering is if you were, because they already banned, you can't wear headdresses and you can't wear red face paint at the games. I'm wondering if you start wearing a lot of Chief Wahoo stuff at the Indians games, that they're going to ban you or going to kick you out of the stadium. I'm wondering, like, if they say, if you come showing the old, they're not going to say Chief Wahoo and they're not going to say Indians. If you come showing the old logo, you'll be escorted out of the ball game. And I have a feeling that that's going to get people really, really pissed off here.
That's pretty embarrassing. Well, the reason why a lot of these name changes is like companies like Nike and all them are holding them hostage. Like they're not going to sell their shit. So they're almost forcing them into these positions. But yeah, if that's the case, it's going to be a big time problem. My whole thing is like, if you keep giving into this, it's never going to be good enough. At one point, somewhere down the road, they're going to find Guardians offensive somehow. It's like if you.
I was wondering, is there any racial connotations to the Guardians? That's what they did when they changed from the Bullets to the Wizards. And they said, "You mean Grand Wizard, like the KKK? Like they shouldn't never left the Bullets."
Yeah, it's dumb. So if you continue to feed into this, these people are not going to stop. They're going to continue to try to outwoke and keep woken and figuring something. They're going to change words around, meanings, like you just said. The fucking Wizards, Grand Wizards. Is that where you're going with this? So. You just got to put up. You just got to feel the uncomfortability of the situation and just take the heat. So that's where I stand. Rack me.
All right, I have to jump on out of here.
That's all right.
To the beach today, but I appreciate it and good luck with your future endeavors.
Some guy offered me $5,000 to come back to MLC. I'm seriously considering it. So we'll see.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, is that what Joe Howard, butt plug Joe Howard offered you to take the podcast down?
Yeah, I know. Fucking cunt. All right. Go listen to Tony's podcast. Thanks again. Have fun on vacation, dude.
Absolutely. Yes. Patreon, just $5 a month. I have content there this week too, like exclusive content. So it's not like I'm just taking the week off. So
yeah, bitches. All right.
Absolutely.
That's a wrap.